EVO. Years later, Nina would remember the suitcase more clearly than the footsteps. It stood inside the second bedroom closet behind a stack of folded blankets, its leather darkened with age and its brass clasps clouded by salt air. Nothing about it appeared threatening until she lifted the luggage tag and saw the name written there in deliberate black ink. Yeah, her name. Not just Nina, but Nina Marie Alvarez, spelled exactly as it appeared on the reservation she had made 3 weeks earlier. The suitcase hadn't been forgotten. It's like it had been prepared. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is the Campfire Files, true stories that followed them home. This is episode 2, What the House Kept. Tonight, we return to Birch House, the 19th century cottage along the coast of Maine, where Nina and Paul Alvarez came searching for quiet summer days, and instead discovered footsteps crossing an empty second floor. Now, when we left them, the sound had stopped outside a locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway. By morning, the familiar machinery of reason had already begun its work. Old houses move, pipes knock, timber, contracts. Travel exhausts us, and unfamiliar rooms keep portions of the brain alert long after the rest of us believes that we're asleep. And sure, all of that was true. But none of it explained why the locked door was suddenly standing open. Now, by the end of this episode, Nina and Paul will discover what Birch House had preserved behind that door, why one suitcase appeared to belong to a woman who had never visited Maine before, and why the owner's response to their discovery would frighten them more than the object itself. Because sometimes the most disturbing answer isn't when no one knows what happened. It's when someone does. Before we continue, please make sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you're listening, and leave us a rating or review when you have a second. It helps new listeners find the show and allows us to keep producing stories like this one. Now, back to Birch House. This is Chapter 3, What the House Kept. Morning has a way of humiliating fear. Events that seemed impossible beneath the privacy of darkness often become almost embarrassing when sunlight reaches them. A noise becomes a pipe, a shadow is a coat. We reassure ourselves that exhaustion, unfamiliar surroundings, and an overactive imagination are usually more reliable explanations than anything supernatural. Daylight rarely solves mysteries. It just restores our confidence that the world still behaves as we expect it to. Nina and Paul didn't sleep well, but they woke up determined to act as though nothing unusual had happened. They had never gone upstairs after hearing those footsteps. Instead, they checked the exterior doors, left several lights burning downstairs, and spent the remainder of the night on the living room sofa. Neither wanted to be the first to say aloud what they had both been thinking. By morning, Birch House had returned to being exactly what it had appeared to be when they arrived. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, gulls drifted somewhere beyond the pines, and the smell of coffee mingled with the faint scent of old wood and salt carried inland from the Atlantic. The same ceiling that had held unexplained footsteps only hours earlier now seemed incapable of concealing anything mysterious. Paul supplied the explanation they both wanted to believe. Look, old houses amplify sound in super unpredictable ways. A branch could have brushed the roof. An animal might have crossed in the attic, right? The noise may have even been echoed from the framing in ways that we don't really understand. But none of those theories were really convincing. But together, I guess they were sufficient enough to preserve the vacation they'd traveled 2,000 miles to enjoy. After breakfast, they climbed the stairs. Morning light stretched across the hallway, illuminating the worn pine floorboards and the 3 familiar doors. The bedrooms stood open exactly as they had left them. The owner's storage room didn't. The door was standing slightly open. The laminated sign still hung from the brass knob, tilted where it had caught against the frame. The lock showed no sign of damage. It had simply been opened. Paul approached first, turning the knob experimentally. The mechanism seemed to work perfectly. The door hadn't sprung loose. Someone had unlocked it. The room beyond looked exactly like the forgotten corner of a family home. Cardboard boxes labeled Christmas or Kitchen or Bennett Family lined the walls beneath the sloping roof. A cedar wardrobe stood beside an old wooden chair, while the air carried the dry scent of paper and fabric and aging timber. Nothing appeared staged, nothing seemed theatrical. It was simply the accumulated stuff, the history of a family that had lived there far longer than any vacation guest ever would. Paul inspected the lock from inside the room, suggesting maybe the owner may have simply forgotten to secure it before their arrival. Old doors swelled and shifted with humidity. Maybe it had only appeared to be locked. Gosh, Nina wanted to believe him until she noticed something that he hadn't. A narrow path crossed the dusty floor between the doorway and the wardrobe. The surrounding boards had collected years of fine gray dust, but this strip remained noticeably cleaner, like someone had walked the same route again and again. And the wardrobe door stood slightly open. Inside hung several heavy wool coats, a few dresses protected by yellowing garment bags, and a child's navy blue jacket. On the floor rested a weathered leather suitcase tucked behind folded blankets. It was that luggage tag that caught Nina's attention. She stepped closer and untied it from the handle. Written neatly across the card in black ink, yep, her full name, Nina Marie Alvarez. Beneath it, her home address in Phoenix. She stared at the tag, convinced she had somehow misread it. Had to have, right? Paul took it from her, examining both sides before looking back at her with an expression that suggested he'd simply run out of reasonable explanations. The reservation contained her legal name, sure, but not her middle name. And they'd never spoken directly with the owner. Everything had been handled through the rental platform. Someone had prepared that tag, someone who should not have known who she was. So Paul immediately called the owner, and the man answered on the fourth ring, sounding pleasant enough until Paul mentioned the storage room. The silence that followed was brief, but unmistakable. He never asked how the door had opened. He never asked whether anything had been taken. His first question was simple. Did you touch the suitcase? When Paul admitted that they had indeed handled the luggage tag, the owner's tone changed. He instructed them to leave the room immediately, close the door behind them, and wait downstairs. Someone would be coming to the house. Paul tried to ask why, but the owner ended the call before answering. Outside, the morning remained impossibly beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the pines, and somewhere beyond them the Atlantic continued its patient conversation with the rocky shore. Inside Birch House, however, the wardrobe seemed to watch them from the end of the hallway, and the suitcase bearing Nina's name waited quietly where someone had left it. Not for the previous guests, no. For her. Chapter 4. The Caretaker. The man who came to Birch House arrived 40 minutes after the owner's phone call in an aging green pickup that seemed as much a part of the Maine landscape as the stone walls lining the roads. Broad-shouldered despite his years, Walter Pike introduced himself as the property's caretaker, a responsibility he had inherited from his father decades earlier. Before speaking to either Nina or Paul, he stood in the driveway and considered the cottage. Kind of like someone considering an old acquaintance after a long absence. And only after that did he walk toward the porch and ask them, in a voice that had been softened by years of the salt air, to tell him exactly what happened. Now, one of the quiet peculiarities of old New England towns is that they don't let houses reinvent themselves. Realtors rename them, rental companies brand them, websites invent identities designed to appeal to vacationers searching for coastal charm. But the people who've lived there longest ignore all of it. Walter never once referred to the place as Birch House. To him, it was simply the Bennett place, and the distinction seemed important. I've noticed that the older a house becomes, the less likely people are to identify it by its address. Addresses belong to county records and delivery drivers. Old houses, eventually, They kind of become people. Walter listened without interruption as Paul described the footsteps, the unlocked door, and the suitcase bearing Nina's name and address. He offered no skeptical smile, no reassuring explanation about settling timbers or overactive imaginations. Instead, he glanced occasionally toward the suitcase, as though measuring the story against memories of his own. And when Paul handed him the luggage tag, Walter studied the handwriting for several long seconds before asking only one question. Where was the suitcase? The owner had told them someone was coming to secure the room, but Walter made no immediate move toward the second floor. Instead, he walked slowly through the cottage, checking the windows, exterior doors, foundation, all with practiced efficiency. Whatever he expected to find, he found nothing that belonged to the ordinary world. Only then did he nod toward the suitcase. You know, my father looked after this place before I did, he said as he climbed the stairs. Back when the Bennetts still lived here. The upstairs hallway appeared unchanged. Sunlight stretched across the pine floorboards, warming those same boards that had carried phantom footsteps the night before. And at the end of the hall, the storage room door remained open. Walter stopped at the threshold, but he didn't step inside. Instead, he rested one hand lightly against the frame and looked into the room with the familiarity of someone revisiting a church long after the congregation has gone home. The last Bennett to live here was Margaret, he said. After her husband disappeared at sea, she spent the better part of 40 years alone in this house. Folks around Camden said grief settled in here like another piece of furniture. He smiled faintly, though there was little amusement behind it. My father used to tell me she kept luggage packed for people who never came home. Every suitcase had a handwritten tag. One day he asked her why. Walter paused. Then she told him departures are easier when the house knows who's leaving. No one spoke. The room itself offered nothing to justify the unease gathering inside it. Nina looked toward the old wardrobe, and Walter followed her gaze. So, he murmured, it's still making the walk. Paul looked at him. What walk? But Walter didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room, opened the wardrobe doors, and looked inside. The coats remained where they had been. The child's blue jacket still hung from its wooden hanger. The hat box rested undisturbed beside a pair of weathered rubber boots. The suitcase was gone. Paul searched anyway, pulling aside blankets and looking behind boxes with increasing urgency. There was nowhere for it to have disappeared. The single window had been painted shut decades earlier, and the room possessed no second exit. Walter never joined the search. He just stared at the empty space where the suitcase had rested. After a long silence, Nina asked whether he recognized the handwriting on the luggage tag. Walter gave an almost imperceptible nod. Margaret printed everything like that. Said her husband couldn't read cursive. He looked back toward the wardrobe. I haven't seen that tag before. Paul folded his arms. Then how did it end up here with my wife's name on it? Walter considered the question carefully before answering. I don't know. It was the first time anyone had admitted as much, and somehow it proved less comforting than another forced explanation. Paul reached for his phone and called the owner again. This time, the call went directly to voicemail. Walter removed a long iron key from beneath his shirt and locked the storage room door. He tested the handle twice before slipping the key back beneath his collar. And as they turned to leave, Nina glanced once more through the narrowing gap before the door closed completely. For the briefest instant, she thought she saw movement inside the wardrobe. Not really someone, just the faint impression that one hanging coat had shifted slightly, like it was disturbed by a passing shoulder. When the latch clicked shut, the hallway fell silent again. Walter waited until they had reached the bottom of the stairs before speaking. The suitcase wasn't there 6 days ago. Paul looked at him sharply. And what does that mean? Walter pulled his cap lower against the afternoon sun and glanced back toward the second floor window. I think, he said, it wasn't ready yet. He climbed into his truck and drove away without another word, leaving Nina and Paul standing alone beneath a sky so brilliantly blue that everything that had happened upstairs already seemed impossible. Except that impossible things have a peculiar habit of lingering long after reasonable explanations have packed up and gone home. Old houses preserve more than furniture and memory. They preserve habits. A favorite chair remains beside the same window long after its owner is gone. A staircase remembers which steps were skipped. Even silence begins to settle into familiar corners. Whether we call that memory, coincidence, or something more mysterious depends largely upon our willingness to believe that walls can witness a life without somehow becoming a part of it. At Birch House, or the Bennett place, Nina and Paul had begun to suspect the house was doing more than remembering. It was preparing. On the next episode, determined not to surrender the vacation to fear just yet, Nina and Paul decide to stay one more night. Outside, a coastal storm rolls in from Penobscot Bay, cutting off the roads and wrapping Birch House in a dense fog. Inside, the locked room opens again, and the missing suitcase returns. And this time, it isn't empty. The Devil Within is an EVO production recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.